Well, the simple reason why I wrote the book is because the opportunity presented itself. I used to publish a community paper here in Chester, Pennsylvania, and I'd go around and make my deliveries. And one particular day I went to one of my advertisers, attorney Clinton Johnson, and we were in the middle of the street, and I remember Clinton saying, "You should write a book about that man right there." I said, "That man? Who's that man?" He says, "Well, that's Melvin Wade. He's the guy who owned the factory down on the river that caught fire, that got people sick, that changed the environmental laws." I vaguely remembered the story, knew very little about it. About 6 months went by, and I'm dropping off papers again at Attorney Clinton's office, and a man was sitting in the chair, and he looked up at me, and he says, "Is that your paper?" I said, "Yes, sir." "How come I've never been in your paper?" I said, "Excuse me, sir, but who are you?" "My name's Melvin Wade. I'm the only black man to have owned a factory down on that river." I said, "Well, I tell you what, I look forward to meeting you one day and scheduling a time for an interview." And that's kind of how it was left. Until about another 6 months later, at the same attorney's office, I'm walking out of the office this time, and Mr. Wade was walking in. And I reminded him of our meeting, and I says, "Well, let's schedule a time right now that we can sit and meet." And he was really anxious to talk. I could tell he had a lot on his chest. So it was a Tuesday afternoon that we met back at the attorney's office for our interview. And I didn't have any questions lined up. I just wanted to hear what he had to say to see if a story was of interest that I could write an article for my paper. And man, in that hour, he really spilled the beans. He had a lot to talk about, and I was intrigued. I knew there was a lot more to what he had to say, so we scheduled another meeting for Wednesday, and then Thursday, and then Friday, and subsequent to that, there were probably 20 or so formal sit-down talks with Melvin Wade, just to pick his brain and see how he thought. For me, it was really an opportunity to capture history. I realized that no one had ever sat down and talked to Mr. Wade to really just get inside of his head through the whole process of growing up in Chester, becoming a businessman, just talk about the businesses that he were involved in, and then, of course, you know, what he's most notorious for, owning the factory, it turning into a toxic waste dump, the fire, the trial, the jail, and what he's been doing in the past 30 years. Who else was going to do it? I figured that if this man has gone 30 years and no one else has captured his story, why don't I give it a shot? I'd never written a book before. This was my chance. The significance of the title, Black Industrialist, the Melvin Wade story, really has everything to do with Melvin Wade wanting to leave a legacy that America can be industrialized by black Americans. He wanted to be the example. He wanted to show the world that black people can get involved in big business. He repeatedly used that term, black industrialist. I'm a black industrialist. And the more I heard it, the more I realized that truly this is all he wanted to do. This was the legacy he wanted to leave. So as a tribute to him and his legacy, I decided to pull of all the things that he told me, that title of himself as the title of the book. But when I ran across this photo, the one that's used, it captured every element of the story that Melvin Wade told me. It's a picture of a black businessman in a dark suit, white shirt, red tie, the classic look of a businessman. He's holding out a wad of money. For Melvin, the whole story has nothing to do with anything besides money. As Melvin said over and over and over again, it's all about money. The American flag in the background, I think, is really the essence of the photo, because Melvin is a true American. He's a capitalist in every sense of the word. He is a staunch Republican. He is ultra conservative. He loves his country, and he loves the fact that as an American, he can be free to enter the prize, to be his own entrepreneur, to make his own money. And that was the legacy that, again, getting back to legacy, that was the legacy Melvin wanted to leave with particularly black folks. So the element of a black man with money and a business suit flanked by an American flag, it had all the elements that described what Melvin wanted to create as a businessman. The hardest part about writing the book was to not have any experience to draw on because I never wrote a book before. I'm a first-time author. Sure, I've written a lot of articles for my newspaper, you know, done a lot of writing in the business world in college, have read a ton of books. But when it comes down to sitting down and writing your own book, that's a whole different process. Truly, the harder element of writing the book was to transcribe the many, many interviews that I had recorded with Melvin Wade. I literally came home and ran the tape and typed out every word that Melvin had spoken to me on the recorder. After that process was finished, I had to literally take every sentence that he gave me and put it in some category according to what he was talking about. Those categories later became the chapters in the book. Of course, just choppy sentences in categories does not make a book. So then I had to kind of arrange the statements in such a way that the story would flow, and then surround it with my narrative. So all those elements were new to me, and it was truly a tedious process, I guess is the best way to put it. Wow, who's the book written for? That's an interesting question. If you read the book, it touches on a lot of topics. You know, for people interested in black history, black business, business ethics, the early days of the EPA, environmental racism, industrial tragedies. If you're interested in just black expression, or even comedy, this is the book for you. One of the things I had to be careful about in writing this book is that I couldn't write it for the people of our local town. It wasn't written for Chester. It wasn't written for the people of Chester. First of all, I knew they wouldn't buy the book, just because. And the other thing is that the book is, the messages that you learn in this book are truly universal. So in some instances where there were a lot of names that Melvin would give me, maybe business partners, friends, politicians, police, it really wasn't important for me to list all those names because only the local people could relate to these people. So in a lot of cases, names were scrubbed. We just used titles or something along those lines. For anybody who just likes a good read, that's who this book is for. It's a lot of fun to read. It was a lot of fun to write. What's been the response from the early readers? At this point, I consider what's out there is only an advanced read until we get the final edit back. But people have said everything that I've expected them to say. It's a funny story, it's a sad story, it's a shocking story, it's a disturbing story. And it's still it's still relevant, let's say, after 30 years. Most of the readers, though, have become Monday morning quarterbacks. After reading, a good part of the book, they want to come back and comment as to what Wade should have done or what he shouldn't have done, the mistakes he made or the missteps that prevented him from being the success that he wanted to be. And I find that to be really intriguing because that means that people have really put themselves inside of the story. The responses, for the most part, have been flattering. I can't tell you a person who read the book who hasn't come back and told me they can't put it down. And that always makes me feel good. That means that the flow that I've worked so hard in creating and piecing this book together has actually worked. My favorite part of the book? I'd have to say it's the whole section on Melvin's opinions. Even I reread those sections over and over and over again, and every time I do, I just either learn something or just crack up laughing. That is one funny man who has an opinion, who I'm somewhat embarrassed to say that I think a whole lot like he does. So I'm nodding in agreement, I'm laughing, and I'm just shaking my head this way because some of the stuff is just really, really bizarre. But those are my favorite parts of the book. Chapters like Wade on Whites, Wade on Blacks, Boys Are Smarter Than Girls, Wade on Politics, Wade on Industry. Those are my favorite parts of the book. The first day that I met Melvin, he showed me this book. And this is the very book that he showed me, Beyond the Flames. He asked me if I had read it. I told him no. I had never heard of it. He says, well, you got to get a copy of this book and read it. And I did. The other book that he had, and this is the very book that he showed me, is The Ebony Success Library, Volume 100, or Volume 1, 1000 Successful Blacks. It's a book that was written in the early 70s by Ebony Magazine, and Melvin is in it. He's the only person from Chester that was listed in this book. So therefore, he's a hero, in my opinion. And I just wanted to remind people of the history of Melvin Wade, how he got to, what he got to. He was a millionaire, a self-made millionaire, and in my opinion, we need to celebrate people like him and learn from him and learn from the mistakes that he made. What are the plans for the book? Well, of course, like I said, right now it's in its final edit. So once we polish it up, we're going to get it out there. We're going to be seeking publishing. We're going to seek some celebrity endorsements. We're going to get it out to the various radio stations, websites, TV stations, magazines, the type of people who review books and can have a wide-ranging audience to read their reviews. Of course, we want to sell books. That's the whole idea. Would love to go out on a tour with Melvin Wade. He's 74 years old, and I just think it would be a great thing to take him on the road so people can see and touch and feel and actually hear his story, which is an intriguing story. I'm still flattered by the fact that for the people who read the book, 9 out of 10 of them say, man, I can see a movie. I can see the movie. Although that's not a plan of mine, if it's to be, it's to be. I personally see 2 movies out of this. I see a documentary, a true right-between-the-eye documentary. There's a lot of facts that need to be brought out that are still not brought out in this case. It would be an interesting documentary, just again, so people can visually see the difference between the laws in the 70s and the laws now. It could be a celebration of the EPA and how it's evolved to protect people like you and me. The other story that I think is so intriguing would be a feature-length movie that would be based on a true story, one of those type of movies. It could be like a comic tragedy. It's a type of movie that you know, we love to watch. You know, sort of a funny guy who becomes successful but then gets knocked down. You know, what do you call it? A rags to riches to rags story again. It's got all the elements of money and sex and drugs and corruption and everything that makes for a good movie. Tragedy, injury, explosions, you know, all those things that Hollywood love to trump up to bring people to an audience. I really think this movie has it. You know, Melvin Wade has left his legacy, some of it notorious, in fact most of it notorious right now. But there's a legacy of Melvin Wade that's been buried, and it's the legacy of being a very, very successful black businessman. And we do not have enough models of black businessmen in our community for people to look up to. So that part of the story, coupled with the crazy part of the story and the tragic part of the story, all makes for one great story. And if I'm the guy to give it to you, God has touched me.
Well, that's the problem with black people. You got to get out. You got to look at yourself as being an American. That's how I looked at it. I'm an American. I happen to be black. I don't like it, but I'm black. All right? But I want to play with Americans. That's how I look at it. But it's going to take another 20, 30 years for blacks to start thinking on this level. You know, they're not thinking on this level of building airplanes and boats. Look, I got my own riverfront. I don't know no black nowhere in America can say, Melvin, I too own the riverfront property. That's never been done. And we're not going to see this again. I would love to leave this to black people, right? But what will they do? They come down here and fry chicken, put they wouldn't know what to do with this. They don't even think on that level.